Tim and I are over here together, and I said, that guy's my friend. And he says, which guy? I see three guys over there. And I said, oh, the tall guy. So I use the attribute of tallness to distinguish the one from the other. And that's the function of an adjective. A demonstrative adjective uses geography. It uses proximity to distinguish. So I have this book and I have that book. And these two are distinguished by their proximity. This is the near and that one is the far. Okay. And so the near and the far are used to distinguish the two. Demonstrative pronouns and demonstrative adjectives are the topic of chapter 13 that we're working with. Excuse me. As we have worked through pronouns thus far, we've seen personal pronouns, and we looked at the first and second person personal pronoun. We realized that those pronouns have person associated with them, but not gender. And so the person comes from the antecedent, and case comes from its function in the sentence. And then we move to the third person personal pronoun, autos. And we saw that autos had person and gender. It's the third person personal pronoun, but it also has gender associated with it, masculine, feminine, and neuter. And so that had both. And so it gets its person and its number and its gender all from its antecedent. It gets its case from its function in the sentence or in its own clause. And now today we're going to look at the demonstratives, and let's see how this works. And I see that we are still... Oh, there we go. Okay.
That's a fire symbol.
A little bit of the magic touch, and we're there. We've seen personal pronouns, first and second person, no gender associated with it. Then we've seen third person personal pronoun, autos, which has gender, number, and case associated with it. Both of these get either their person or gender, person and number, or gender, person, gender, and number from the antecedent. Now the antecedent is the word that the pronoun represents. It doesn't modify the antecedent, it represents it. It stands for it. It takes the place of the antecedent. It's all of those, but it gets its case from its own function. Now, pronouns take the place of nouns. And whenever we ask the function of a noun, we're asking what case is it? Or we ask what case is it, we're asking for the function. So if I say what case is this and what is its function, you look at the case ending, you determine that this is a dative, and you say, well, it's the object of the preposition, or it's the indirect object. Or if I have one of those verbs like pistuo, I believe, it might take its direct object in the dative case instead of the accusative case. And so case and function are always related in nouns. Well, pronouns are taking the place of the nouns, so the pronoun, the case of the pronoun, is always related to its function. But when we saw autos, we recognize now that autos sometimes gets its case from its function in the sentence. So if you have autu, and you see that it's following a noun, it means his. Its case is genitive. Its function is possession. Now we saw that. But then we were working with autos, and we also saw situations where autos might get its case because it is modifying a noun. And all of a sudden, autos, which is a pronoun, is agreeing with a noun in gender, number, and case, and behaving like an adjective. And we call these pronouns that can have, that behave like adjectives and can function as adjectives, We call them pronominals. Pronoun and nominal for noun. Pronominal adjectives, they are adjectives that can behave in the same way that nouns do. And so sometimes we had autos functioning as a pronoun, an independent pronoun. Other times we had it functioning as an adjective, an intensive adjective or an identical adjective. Well, now we are moving to demonstratives. And demonstrative pronouns are not telling us he, she, and it. The demonstrative pronoun is specifying proximity. And so you have demonstrative pronoun, this, which represents the near demonstrative, or that, which represents the far demonstrative. So this, the near demonstrative, this one right here, and the far demonstrative, that one over there. So the near and the far demonstrative pronoun. We have seen this already in phrases like, this is my son. We've had that sentence. When we've had the word this, we've had hutos. And hutos is the, well, I should put that up higher. Hutos is the near, try that one more time. Hutos is the near demonstrative. And ekenos is the far demonstrative. Now, we'll look at the paradigms for these in just a moment. We have also seen the phrase "in those days." And the those would be the far demonstrative, ekenos. So we've seen those a little bit already in translation. And I think that Mounce has probably already given you hutos to work with. I don't know that he's given you ekenos. Now the difficulty with hutos is that it looks very much like autos, and the two can easily be confused. And so that's part of what we need to work with in understanding how to work with the demonstratives. Let's look at these then and take a look at autos. Autos is a 2-1-2 pronoun, and because of that 2-1-2 configuration, it can also function as an adjective. And this is simply the 2-1-2 endings. The masculine and neuter endings are from the second declension. The feminine endings are from the first declension, and this happens to be the eta form of the first declension. The only thing that we have to notice about autos, and you've learned this already, is that it's the a ending instead of the omicron nu ending here in the neuter. And so that's a little bit different. Otherwise, it's a standard 2-1-2 endings. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that every one of these begins with the same first syllable, out. Alpha, upsilon, tau, and it has this smooth breathing. Now, when we get to hutos, we recognize that this has some features that are very much the same. It's still a 2-1-2. It has the eta form of the feminine endings here in the singular. And a number of the endings have that alpha, upsilon prefix, the alpha, upsilon, tau prefix, the same as autos had. However, when you look at it carefully, you'll notice that it has a rough breathing on it. And then this also has forms with an initial tau. And so you have hutos, haute, tuta. When you look at the haute, that looks an awful lot like aute. And the only distinction is the rough breathing here. You go down to the plural form, hautai, that looks like autai. Let's go back and look at autos again. There, aute, autai, smooth breathing, with the demonstrative, haute, hautai, rough breathing. So how am I going to tell the difference between these two? Because, you know, I hate to say it, but not all of your professors are completely sanctified yet. I know that you think they are, but they're really not. And some of them, particularly if the Red Sox lose and they're in a bad mood, might, on occasion, give you something like haute and say, which of the three eyes is functioning here? And if you're not really sharp and you don't see that rough breathing, you're going to fall right into that track, take the hook, the bait hook, line, and sinker, and you're going to run with it and treat this as though it's out-tossed. When in fact you should say, this guy didn't have his devotions today. He's being sneaky and underhanded and mean-spirited. He's trying to trick me into thinking this is an out-toss when it really isn't an out-toss. So how are we going to tell the difference? Well, you'll notice that the masculine is hutos, the feminine is haute. Hutos, haute, tuta. Well, you also have the tau in front of the alpha upsilon. And so you have a prefix, or the first syllable, hoot, hout, toot, tout. Hoot and toot, hout and tout. And if you can remember that, you'll remember that you're working with a near demonstrative pronoun. And autos is just autos all the way through. So hoot and toot, hout and tout. Part of the battle of working with hutos is recognizing that it's hutos and not autos. All right? Well, this is the near demonstrative, and it means this. Or in the plural, it means these. Now, occasionally, you will see in vocabulary that Mounce will mention that it means he, she, or it. Occasionally, the demonstrative can weaken and function as a personal pronoun. But the way Mounce presents that is very unfortunate, because he gives you the impression that it's jump ball. And in any situation, you can translate the demonstrative as this or he. And that's just not the case. That's very misleading. Mounce gives you another example of something that's misleading. There is the word huios. Huios means son or descendant in Greek. It does not mean child. Now, if you go back to Mounce's previous editions of his textbook, you will note that he always has son or descendant for huios. When a Greek saw the word huios, the Greek was understanding a male descendant or immediate son, either the first generation or a subsequent generation, but a male. And this is very important in the Greek mind, and that distinction is very important. Now, we don't like to talk about sons, and we don't like to use that word in the Bible because it's not politically correct. You don't want to make gender distinctions that way. You want to talk about children. And so Mounce has been under tremendous pressure to change the meaning of that word to child. And so in the third edition of his book, he put child in there as a definition. And that's an accommodation to the pressure of culture. But in doing that, you lose something of supreme theological importance. And that is that we are called sons of God. All of us, men and women, are called sons of God. And in the culture of the first century, that was an honorific distinction. That was something that gave you status. It gave you an important significance. The sons in that time had a higher status than the daughters. But particularly the firstborn son was the one who got the inheritance from the father. And Christ is the firstborn, and we are sons as Christ is son. And we are the firstborn son. We have that status. We're co-inheritors with Christ. And so we have to be very careful in translating the scriptures, not to bend to our culture to a degree that we're missing something that was very significant in the original culture, that is laden with theological weight and importance. Now, I understand on the last exam that there was some question about huios. We'll give you credit if you put down that it meant child. But from here on out, there are words for son and daughter. There are words for child in Greek. The son and the daughter are masculine and feminine. Child is neuter. Child doesn't make that distinction. And the Greeks can make that distinction if they want. And when they do it for a particular reason. And so understanding that dynamic, not judging it as good or bad, but understanding that dynamic in that culture gives you insight to what the authors were saying, because they had that choice and they made a particular choice. Now, in our culture, we're having a tendency to judge that and say, well, that is the wrong kind of distinction to make, and everybody should be treated equally, and we shouldn't make that distinction. Fine, if that's our culture, but let's not make the mistake of losing what that distinction meant and what was being communicated by that distinction in that ancient world. And the fact that all of the people that stayed at the cross and the first witnesses to the resurrection were women is significant in that culture. And we're going to miss that if we don't understand that distinction in the culture. And the fact that shepherds were the lowest level of society, and they were the ones that were entrusted in receiving the news of the birth of Christ, and they're the ones that were entrusted. They would never be brought into a court of law to witness to anything, in the same way that women would not typically be brought into a court of law to witness to anything. But it was shepherds at the birth, and it was women at the cross and the resurrection. This is saying something profound in the way that Christ reversed cultural norms for the sake of kingdom. And if in our culture we just obliterate that in the way that we translate Scripture, we're robbing people of seeing something profoundly significant. And the interesting thing is that women who are battling for significance are the ones that are often behind eliminating all of the gender differences in Scripture, and in so doing, they're eliminating one of the most powerful tools for the healing power of Christianity and the distinction that Christianity brings to the cultural norms and how women and children and marginalized people are treated. Well, enough on that rant. We've got to get back to Greek. But in any case, those of you that lost points for that, we'll give you the points, but please, in the future, understand that distinction and don't rob yourselves of that richness of Scripture. Well, I have to say one other thing. The word anthropos is a generic term. And I have to say that there are some translations of the Bible that always translate that men. That's not how it would have been understood by the Greeks. There are a lot of occasions where anthropos would have been understood as persons in general and would not have had a gender distinction. There are situations where it would, but we have words for male and we have words for female. Anthropos tends to be a word that is generic and means humanity. And so we do need to correct some translations that always translate that men. And masculine plurals are also generic in Greek. And there are those that will take a masculine plural and always translate that as men. But it's not in Greek. In the same way that adelphoi was a masculine plural meaning brothers, that was a generic and an inclusive term even in Greek culture and would have included brothers and sisters. And so that translation as brothers and sisters of adelphoi is perfectly legitimate because that's how the original Greeks would have understood that term. So on the one hand, we want to preserve certain things, but we don't want to artificially impose other things that would not have been a part of the gender distinctions in the Bible. So I have to give that balancing word to you so that you use wisdom in going in and looking at gender in the Scripture and not getting confused about that. Well, I've taken too long on that. If we need to say more about it, let me know and I will. But we actually need to get back to the chapter material here. So when we look at hoot and toot and hout and tout, the clue is that if you have an O vowel in the suffix of the word, you will have an O vowel in the first syllable of the word. So you'll notice that we have the O vowel all the way through here. We have the eta or the A vowel here in the suffix, and so we have the alpha in the first syllable. But down here where you have the O vowel in the ending, you have the O vowel in the first syllable as well. So hoot and toot, hout and tout are the forms of the near demonstrative pronoun or near demonstrative adjective. It can go either way. The demonstrative is pronominal. When we look at a kanos, we have that same thing where it's a 2-1-2, no omicron nu on the neuter, it's just the omicron. And we're already accustomed to that because of the article ha-he-ta, not ha-he-ton, ha-he-ta. There's no nu on the neuter, nominative, and accusative singular. Otherwise, it's the 2-1-2. And this is the far demonstrative, either pronoun or adjective. Now, as I speak of it as a pronoun, we can see a situation here where you might have a sentence, kurios, a pen, tuta. Now, tuta would be the neuter, singular, nominative, or accusative. It's the near demonstrative pronoun. Why do I say near demonstrative pronoun? Well, it's not modifying anything. So it's going to be the pronoun rather than the adjective. The Lord said this. Simple translation, the Lord said this. This would be the near demonstrative pronoun. If I had a little bit different sentence and I said ha kurios a pen and then said to anthropo, then take that out of there. The Lord said, or the Lord spoke to this person. Here we have it modifying anthropo, agreeing in gender numbering case to anthropo. And so this is the near demonstrative adjective. The Lord spoke to this person. Now, tuto, when you look at that, there is no article in front of it. It's in the predicate position. Typically with pronominals, they will show up in the predicate position even though they're acting like an attributive adjective would behave and modifying a noun. We don't try to translate that in a predicate way and put the verb me in there and say this is the person or this is the man. No, we don't do that. We're in the dative case here, so it's not going to be a predication. This is really modifying anthropo, and so it's functioning as an adjective, but it does not have the attributive position. It has the predicate position. And this is characteristic. We saw this with the intensive use of autos. It would modify a noun, but it didn't have the article in front of it. And this, again, is characteristic of pronominal adjectives. Pronominal adjectives. They will oftentimes lack the article even though they are modifying in an attributive way. What's the attribute that's being ascribed to this noun? Well, it's nearness. It's this particular individual, this particular one, the one that's right here now, this one. If I had ekena, then it would be that individual over there. And so the attribute of nearness or farness is what is being used to distinguish this person. Not tallness, but nearness or farness. Question?
If that was in the nominative case, the tutos and the anthropos, and it was predicated, would you feel like you need to put the Amy in it?
Well, it depends. If we had the statement hutos, esteem, anthropos, then it would be clear, or ha anthropos even, then it would be clear to translate this is the person or this is the man. But let's say I had just this way, with no esteem in there, and I said hutos, ha anthropos. How would I translate that? Well, I would have to look. Is there another verb over here that is going to predicate something in the sentence? Or is this all I'm working with? If that's all that I'm working with, and there's no other predication, then I would have to say, this is the person, this is the man. But if I've got another verb, and there's another part of the sentence and I'm predicating it, then it's just this man said this, or this person did that. There's another verb over here introducing a predication, which makes this modifying this and not predicating. All right? I think you will find it very rare not to have esteem in there if it's a predication. With adjectives, you have predicate adjectives all the time that leave the form of AD out of it, and you have to supply it. But when you're working with hutos, I can't think of an occasion in the New Testament that I've read where there's been a predication of hutos and the esteem was left out. I think it's always there, and I think they put it there to avoid this kind of miscommunication. All right? So whether it's hutos or kainos, that's what you look at, and that's how it functions. That's basically all there is to it when you work through the demonstrative. When you're identifying the function of the demonstrative, you have to include three things. You have to tell me whether it's near or far. You have to identify it as the demonstrative, and then you have to tell me whether it's functioning as the pronoun or the adjective. If it's by itself and not modifying anything, it's the pronoun. If it is modifying a noun, then it is the demonstrative adjective. Now, a lot of times people will see a sentence like this, ha kurios apen tuta, the Lord said this. And they'll feel it's a little bit awkward. They feel that they have to plug in some noun to go with it. The Lord said this thing. They may feel that they need to plug that in. You don't need to. If you feel that you have to, okay, do that. But this is going to be a pronoun in Greek, not an adjective. Regardless if you add a word to it to make the English translation smoother, it's still the pronoun in Greek and not the adjective. All right? Well, any questions on that?